Okay. All right. So how do other parts of your identity, like how do other parts of your identity and who you are intersect with being autistic? I will go first. Did everybody hear me? Just thumbs up. Okay. So yeah, I'm asking how do, see, this is what happens when I'm reading the chat. I'm reading the chat and I don't know what I'm doing. I can't read the chat. Thank you, Sandra.
I'll read the chat.
How do, different parts of your identity or all of your identity intersect with autism? For me, I feel like this can be a really complicated question and a hard thing to answer. And I know that. So if you have nothing, very little, a whole ton to say, I get it. For me, I knew I came out as trans in my early 20s, and I started medically transitioning like almost 10 years ago, maybe like 9 years ago. And I thought what was going to happen is I was thinking people like, no matter what, even if we don't get along, there's this thing we can relate on and like stand by each other with, right? But it wasn't until realizing I'm autistic that like big community of people showed up. And the wild part to me was how many people are trans and gender diverse. And it was like, I literally, like, I feel like I have goosebumps just saying it out loud. I'm like, it was like, I'm 35 and I've had friends throughout my life. I've been parts of things. But I've never felt like totally comfortable myself. And when I came out as trans, I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, why don't I get along with trans people even, like, and then I started meeting autistic people. And honestly, it's like, it's shocking. I have this idea, I'm like, autistic people are just the best ever, but it's really like, because I feel this immense understanding and such a lack of pressure, like moderating something like this with non-autistic people. I don't care what gender people are. It would cause me a lot more stress in like, I would use too much energy trying to sound excited and smile and fake all these things so that I wouldn't be interpreted as like bored or people think I'm tired a lot, like things that just aren't true. People think I'm in a bad mood because of my facial expression. And I've just been so exhausted of hearing that. And it's just really nice to like feel like I finally have a community of people. And yeah.
Yay. And you're right. Like, there are so many autistic people who are also trans and LGBTQIA, like so many of us. It was one of the first things I noticed when I started to tiptoe into Actually Autistic Twitter 4.5 years ago. I'm like, hey, look, this is like a very queer friendly space I'm wandering into. That's interesting, because usually, like, I'm from Texas, okay? I'm not from California, where some of my favorite humans in this bubble are from. And a lot of my favorite people are always from California. I don't know what's up with that. Y'all are ahead of the times, I suppose. But here in Texas, it's not such a great place to grow up as a queer person, unfortunately. And that autistic identity, like, at least in my own experience, really does impact every aspect of me as a person, and that's tied very heavily into gender identity, because I mean, if you some of you here may have noticed that neurodivergent people, autistic people especially, don't tend to fit in with social constructs, right? Very neatly. We kind of make our own way and say no thanks to the social constructs a lot of the times. And gender's another social construct. It's like, so many of us like see it and we're like, why do we have to go along with what everyone else is doing? Like, you just like with everything else. And it's just so funny to see that, for a long time before I found out I was autistic, I had this really elaborate mask that I had built doing things that I thought I was expected to do because I was trying to get on in life and not make too many waves in society and just not get beat up and not get bullied and not, not be noticed for the wrong things. You know, you make yourself small and you don't want to be noticed and you don't want to be seen, and that's really horrible because you can't be authentic because you're so busy making yourself small. And you know, I had this assignment at birth. It's like, this is you must do this, you are female. Like, I was assigned this way at birth, and it was like I had no say in any of this, you know. And when found out I was autistic, and I started meeting other trans non-binary people, because I'd only ever met trans binary people growing up, and it was like, oh, this is me, this is an option, oh my gosh, like, thank goodness. But it was like, until I like started to find the autistic people, I had no idea, because here in Texas, like, there's not a lot of representation, and I hadn't um naturally gone and seeked out a bunch of online LGBTQIA spaces. I hadn't, but I wandered into autistic spaces, and it very much, to me, was like one of the most LGBTQIA spaces I'd been in a long time, other than, you know, if you go to a pride, you know, here in town in Austin, which is like the nearest big city to where I'm at. But we don't, I'm from a small town outside of Austin. We don't have a pride here where I'm from, or any of that. So it's like, it gave me this community, and then all of this, like, the parallels. I'm now obsessed, and that is not an exaggeration, that is an appropriate use of the word, over all of these parallels between being queer and queer rights and being neurodivergent and neurodivergent rights. It's like all I think about. Like, it is, I'm so obsessed with how these things are similar. And it brings me joy to dive into all of that, because it's like, ooh, comparing the things.
Yeah, that's totally relatable. Before I pass it to someone else, I just want to put out there, in case people are considering talking about things that are hard about it, that's also, you know, I can totally relate to everything you're saying. Everything I said before, I was basing a lot of it on like my positive experience as an autistic person, but also what I have realized is like some things are really a lot more challenging being trans and autistic. I can just give a really brief example of like, I have to deal with a lot of medical things, get a lot of you may have seen the post I put up about like how hard it is to get like letters and things like that. So my autistic self, my executive function, really struggles with bureaucracy, phone calls, pharmacies, doctors. I mean, all those things, and how being trans and autistic impact each other in that way can be really challenging. So I wanted to like throw out that exists as well, and throw it to the next person.
I can relate to a lot of what has been said so far. Of course, like, you know, I put in like race, you know, being Black was always going to come first in that. And it just, you know, impacts the whole experience. Like being diagnosed, you know, people talk about being diagnosed when they were like in their late lives and like, you know, in their 20s. You know, I'm thinking like, yeah, 40. That's really late, you know? And the only reason that I actually even thought of getting an ADHD diagnosis and not autistic at that time was because of my little brother being diagnosed when he was 7. And he got diagnosed because I was adopted by white parents. So they recognized that there was something different. So that's how he was diagnosed when he was a kid, but diagnosed when I was 40. And just growing up in spaces like that, you know, there is the way that their need to mask, I think, for Black people is just way too high, you know? Like there's no like, oh, you know, oh, just quirky and strange and da da da, you know, because there's so much that we can, like I felt anyways growing up, but maybe because of just how I grew up or where I grew up, there was so much at risk to lose. And but I wasn't very good at it. Like I didn't know. I was just a mess, like all the time, just meltdowns and shutdowns and things like this. And it was awful. I think when I think about like the overlap of ADHD and being autistic, I just feel like it's, for me, when I first got diagnosed with ADHD and I was like, okay, meds, think I'm doing all right. You know, I'm starting to get the hang of it. But then like I wasn't. And it's like the wheels came off. And it was just like things that I'm like, wow, I'm really struggling with executive function. Like even with medication, it's like I still can't sort through it, or wanting to have things like really ordered, but then struggling with things to be just spontaneous too at the same time, and just not being able to find that balance. And I find that even still now, a couple of years later, I'm talking to my psychiatrist today actually, I just said at one point, I'm like, I don't even know how to manage this person that I am now. That I don't know if they were there a few years ago. I don't even know if that all makes sense because it is like 12:30 here, but I've just learned in this whole journey so far that it's so complex. There's nothing Audre Lorde talks about, like, you know, that we're not single issue people because we don't live single issue lives, you know, like we are so complex, they all intertwine and interconnect, and it's hard to tell them all apart, I think, you know, tease them apart. That's where I'm at right now.
I mask ×3. I mask autism. I code switch, and I flip between the gender binary. I have never quite belonged. I have rarely felt comfortable and less alone. Because I am not good at masking in the first place. Keeping track to hide so many parts, too tiring. So just rather be alone.
I just have to say that I just felt like so much of that.
Oh,
like,
me too.
It's too tiring.
And that's why T's Instagram is blowing up all the time, because that was just like so real and true. And I don't know about you guys, I am exhausted all the time in not appropriate way.
All the time, and just thinking that like there's just so many identities and so many things that you've got to cover up and take care of and just be aware of. I think also with like so many, when you have so many overlapping oppressions as well, I like I'm just thinking, Josie, about when you were talking about like medical appointments and the things that trans and gender expansive like population or community has to manage that others don't. It's just like in that, it's just so much all the time.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes for me being autistic is like feeling exactly what you said. You just ended saying there's too much all the time. I'm like, I always feel, and I know people feel stressed out and like there's a lot going on. I could have one thing to do today. It like completely depends on like how everything else is impacting my life and how I'm able to respond to it, and if any of it is actually manageable. Yeah.
I had to take the day off just to be able to do this meeting. I couldn't mentally do it any other way. So I mean,
thank you.
Yeah, sensory-wise,
thank you so much.
It's needed, right? Like, I mean, I think we all
have
to be kind to ourselves, right?